Good morning and welcome to my hobby table once again. As you can see on the table today, I have a Fox engine. Now, this is a very common Fox engine and it's one that I actually featured. It's the same model as one I featured in 2021, I believe. It was in March or May or something of 2021. And it is the Fox 40 Deluxe BBRC engine, and it's a model number 24098. Now that's the exact same one I had before, and I'll show you, or I'll put a link to the video here. But the one I had before was a bit more complete, and I'll get into that, and it had a different box. In fact, the box was older, and I believe in that video I stated that that engine I thought came out around 1987 or so, at least released to production and to the public. This one is probably clearly a later version than that because of the box new packaging here. Now this is not complete just because of the fact that it has newspaper on the top. Now this engine, if it was complete, it would have a big piece of foam sandwiching all these things on the top. Now these two glow plugs that are in here did not come with the engine. They just happen to be Fox plugs that I put in here, and we'll talk about that a bit later too. But the Fox 40 Deluxe engines, or the Deluxe engines of Fox engines, were always so super cool because they came with a spinner. And let me just pull all the items out of this box and we'll start talking about this. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to look inside this engine. Now, I purchased this engine back in November of 2023. And just a couple of days ago, I went back to look at the the purchase of this thing to see, you know, sometimes you can click, or not sometimes, all times, you can go back and click for a certain period of time anyway. Click on your old ad or the old ad that you purchased it from and go back and reread the ad. At some point, either maybe the seller takes that down or it just gets taken down. I went back there to find out more information about this engine because I had forgotten. Now, I was under the impression that when I bought this thing, that it was new in box. And I'm seeing a couple of things that, to me, tell me that that may not necessarily be the case. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I want to do a look inside this before I take it out and run it. Now, the first one I had a few years ago, I know I was very underwhelmed by the performance because there's a nice review article, several review articles on this engine that I'll post links to in the description, where they state, obviously they state RPM values. Well, I was never able to achieve those RPM values with that first engine, so I don't know that that was the driving force for me getting this one or not. I just saw this at a good price last year. I was like, well, the heck with it, I want to get it because I've always liked the Fox 40 engine, the Deluxe. They're cool. They're cool engines. So anyway, I wanted to look inside. Now, I have smelled this, and I cannot smell the evidence of any running. However, I know that in the 70s and maybe into the 80s, and I'm not exactly sure the timeline for sure. Fox engines used to run all of their engines before they packaged them and sold them, all of them. Whether that was still being done in the late 80s, I'm not sure. But the first indication of that was, now, first of all, this came with this glow plug. Now, I believe Fox engines may have come standard with a glow plug, and that's the other thing this didn't come with. It didn't come with a manual. And I know that at the time of that last video, I also searched the Mikoa site and I could not find the exact manual for this engine. Fox had so many different engines, I couldn't find the exact manual for this engine, and I still haven't. So I'm not sure if it actually came with a glow plug from the factory, but this is clearly a Fox plug here, and it's a Fox Miracle plug. Those of you that are familiar with Fox engines, you'll know what a Miracle plug is, and I've got an example of a Fox Miracle plug right here. And what the Fox Miracle plug was, it was always a very good plug. In fact, early in my hobby career with four-stroke engines, I believe I always use the Fox Miracle plug almost exclusively. It says superior idle for 2-cycle and 4-cycle motors. So Fox, I guess, was always saying that this is one of those things that could be used in a 2-stroke or a 4-stroke engine. Typically, I would only use this in a 4-stroke engine. I don't know why. Maybe because that is the type of shape and length that OSF plug had. But they're marketing it so that it can be used in either. Now, it came with this plug in there. Whether that means that this plug was original to this engine or not, I don't know. All I know is that this plug, hopefully you can see it, does look like it has been lit up and there's a slight amount of carbon under there. Now, whether that carbon came from combustion in this engine, I cannot say. I do not know for sure. That's one of the reasons why I want to do what I'm going to do here. So I think what I'm going to do here, so first let me talk a little bit more about this particular Deluxe engine for those of you that are unfamiliar with it. So it came with some wrenches here and a couple of screws. I'm not really sure, which is interesting because I don't know that these screws are for the exhaust, never mind. So what makes the Fox 40 Deluxe engine interesting in many of the Fox variants is that you don't just, it came with this spinner, but you don't just go putting it on here on the back of this thing, on the thrust washer here. You pull that off because the actual back plate of this spinner is an integrated thrust washer. So then you just put this on there, put your prop on there, and now you've got this nut that attaches the spinner to it, screws right onto the crankshaft. It's a super cool little system that's really awesome. The only thing about it that always perplexed me was the size of the cutouts in this thing, because this is not a plastic spinner. It's it's a thin aluminum spinner. But I was always curious about, it must have only been designed for a certain type of prop in that time period, and maybe it was those little top flight wood rev-up props, because I don't even believe those old black master air screw props fit in here properly, and I know an APC sure as heck doesn't fit in here. So it's one of those things where I no longer have a Dremel, so I really don't have the means to go and start hogging this thing out to fit different props. So I'm going to have to go and see if I've got one of those old style top flight PowerPoint, Power Tip, or whatever those props are called, the really thin ones in a 10.6 or other sizes so that they'll fit properly in here, because I believe those are the only ones that fit perfectly in here, which kind of sucks. But, maybe one day I'll go out and get a Dremel again, because I just don't have the need to have a Dremel. But it is never fun to have to sit here and try and cut this thing out, because if you don't do it exactly the same on either side, then you can imbalance this spinner. But I mean, I love the concept. The concept of attaching this and having it on there is just really cool. Now, we're looking at this, and to me I'm smelling it. I don't smell fuel residue. What I smell is, it seems like I'm smelling maybe what was manufacturing oil. So I don't know. But let's pop this carb off first and see if the crankshaft and that port tell us anything. Oh, I didn't really mean to take that all the way off, but oh well, I did. Okay, so I'm not sure how well you're going to be able to see in here, and I'm probably going to need to put this on here. If I can get an angle in there. I mean, it looks okay. It looks like maybe there's a little bit of carbon. It's not a shiny piece of steel, put it that way. I don't know what it is. I can't really see, and I don't plan on taking the bearings out and taking the crankshaft out, so this is about the best look we're going to get to see here. So, again, smelling it, it does not smell like fuel combustion. It doesn't smell like glow fuel residue whatsoever. It just smells like manufacturing oil. Now, I think it's interesting that, what is this? It's got some kind of silicone stuff sealant on around the carb. I don't think I want to take that off necessarily, but it's curious to me that that's there because I just don't know that that's something that Fox would do from the factory. That's kind of interesting. I just don't know that that's something that Fox would do from the factory, but you never know. So the Fox 40, many of the Fox engines design have this really elongated backplate. And it's interesting and cool. It's interesting in that when you take this off, you can see more of the internals of the engine. But the drawback is Fox made many of these types of engines with this size backplate. And this is what they called a small frame, or I think it was a C series frame or something, a small frame. And then they have large frame engines. And I think the 45 is a large frame engine, which means that should you damage this back gasket, which is highly possible when I remove this cover, hopefully not, they have different sizes gaskets. Just looking at two of them kind of close together, you'd say, well, they're the same size, but they're really not. So, and the other thing that's interesting about this Fox engine is that aside from the screws to retain the muffler are hex or socket cap head screws, every other screw on here, with the exception of that carb screw, is a cross point. I need to set this so that I can ratchet it. Yeah, there we go. Oh, that's super loose. So hopefully I can remove this without damaging this gasket, because I do not have a replacement gasket. And I do plan on running this engine. Now, one of the things I just noticed here, and I think I've noticed it on Fox engines before also, is that the machining just isn't quite, obviously, it's not OS caliber machining. I just felt that first screw coming out didn't feel super smooth. Kind of like this one. Doesn't feel super smooth. Why that is, maybe there's just a little, maybe they ran it and some fuel residue or something got in there. I don't know, but so it is possible that these were run at the factory, and if they ran it at the factory, they probably would have put some, whatever their machining or oil is in it afterwards, which might explain why I smell what I do here. Boy, I don't like this. Really. Now, I'm sure that I could probably get a replacement gasket from Mikoa still. I don't want to have to do that. Looks like I'm going to be okay here. Okay, so here's the reveal on this. I see maybe a partial swirl there. All right, I would say this is a new engine. If it was run at the factory, they dried it up or something, because I think I got good lighting there. It looks really nice. Now, the one thing I neglected to mention also here is that this is not a ringed engine. The Fox 40s, this variant, was Duke Fox's first foray into creating ABC engines. And it says that specifically in the Clarence Lee review and probably the other engine review. So I'm thinking that this, yeah, that doesn't smell like it's ever been run. So this is a virgin engine, never been run, so that's cool. And the thing that I think is interesting here is that later ABC engines like OS was actually ABN, but say the ASP 46 ABC engine, I've got one of those right behind me here. Even with the glow plug off, you can't really just do this easily. There's a pretty good pinch. Now I feel a little bit of a pinch, but that's a characteristic of ABC engines, is even with the plug off, it's pretty tight. If you didn't have the thrust washer on here like this, you wouldn't be able to turn it over by hand. At least on some ABC engines I've had, they're super tight. Now this is supposedly an ABC engine. See, no ring there. No ring. But I can turn it over. Now, when I had that plug in there, it had super compression. I could still turn it over with this, not like this, but It had good compression. So yes, I know that I did an inside look of that other one I had too, and it had some kind of weird looking green residue in here, and it had clearly had been run by somebody, whether it was the factory or what, I don't know. But this, maybe they were no longer running engines at this time, because I don't even really see evidence of any oil here. I mean, it's perfectly dry. Has a smell of fresh machining, I guess you would call it. Factory smell for an engine. But no, this is cool. This is really nice. So anyway, that was a quick look inside at this Fox 40 BBRC Deluxe engine. And I'm going to put this thing back together. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with this. I think I may just leave that on there and hope for the best. But I will be getting this out on the bench very soon. I just got to go out in the garage and find an appropriate size prop. And we'll run this thing, maybe with several plugs. Now, I had two plugs here. I had a Miracle plug, and many of you that are very familiar with Fox plugs also know that they made a long plug with an idle bar. Out in the garage, in my toolbox, I have one of those also, and it's probably fairly new. But then, the last time I was at Hobbytown, USA here, they happened to have some this Fox short plug. Now, I thought it was interesting because this thing says 2 cycles and 4 cycle motors, but then they made a short plug. So I don't know if they made short plugs for specific engines because of their design and compression ratio or what, but it's interesting to me that they made a short plug. And they may have even made a plug that wasn't necessarily considered short either, kind of more of an intermediate, but I'm not sure. I'd have to go and do a little bit more research on that. But the only reason I threw these in there was just a comparison, because it is entirely possible that when I run this thing, I may run it with the Miracle plug that came with it, assuming that glows fine. I may run it with a short plug, and I may run it with an idle bar plug. And since I do not have the actual instructions that came with this particular model engine, I don't know what plug they're recommending that you run. And that's the other thing I kind of commented on that inside look at that Moki engine, is that in all these reviews, these engine reviews that are put out by Clarence Lee and Peter Chin and all these other folks, they never ever mention the plugs they used. And I really, really wish they would. Just because then you can kind of have, that's one other variable. Because if you're trying to attain or achieve the same RPM figures that they are, and you're not using the same plug, well, especially idle figures, it could really impact your ability to say, well, yes, this does work according to what they said it did. Now, I haven't had that be a factor much before, but it would just be nice if they would include, because they included, especially Clarence Lee, included so many technical details, but they never ever said what plug they used. They'd always say what fuel they used for break-in and all that, and the temperature and barometric pressure and humidity and all that stuff, but they never said what frickin' plug they used. So why is that? Anyway, this has been a look inside this Fox 40 BBRC Deluxe engine.